Oi, pessoal, boa tarde. I'm so glad to be here. I'd like to thank Disal for the invitation and Cambridge University Press as well to talk about a topic that I'm passionate about, which is CLIO. So the topic of my presentation today is the challenges that we have as teachers when we want to work with cross-curricular content into the classroom. I see that lots of people here are already on the chat. I see people from Mexico. How interesting. From Minas Gerais, São José do Rio Preto. Hi, everyone. It's great to have you here. I'm just going to wait just other 2 minutes to see if we have more participants before we start our session, okay? Okay, so let's move on. Let's get started, actually. Today, our agenda is a bit challenging as well as the topic because we have lots of things to address. So I'd like to share our agenda for this for the session with you. First, I'd like to learn a bit about your teaching context or contexts. Then we'll be defining CLIO. We'll be talking about subtypes of CLIO as well. Then we will discuss the benefits of CLIO for teachers and students. And then you're going to fall in love with CLIO, I'm sure, if you haven't already. Next, we'll discuss the limitations of CLIO, and this is the moment your heart will be broken. But then, with the tips that I have here for a successfully inspired lesson, a CLIO lesson, actually a lesson with inspiration from CLIO, I'm sure that you're going to fall in love with it again. We have 10 tips and a bonus tip. And finally, at the end, we're going to work with the questions and answers. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about myself first before we continue. My name is Viviane. I've been working as a teacher trainer, consultant, editor, and writer since 1994. It's been a long time. And I'm one of the authors of Game Changer, which is a series published by Cambridge University Press, especially for teen students, for students in Ensino Fundamental 2 in Brazilian schools. Okay. As I mentioned before, we're going to have a session with questions and answers at the end of this talk, at the end of the webinar, but you can leave your questions already, okay, in the PNR questions area. Okay, all right, so let's start with a kind of an enigma for you, let's say. Yeah, here we have students in a science class. They're having this science class in English, and we have these guys here with horses and carts in this ancient mosaic. They have a lot in common. You're going to find out what in a few moments. I forgot to share the slides. Sorry. You're not able to see the slides? Well, I thought I had already shared them. Let me see if I'm doing anything wrong here. Oops, sorry. How funny. Okay, let me try again. Can you see it now? No? Oh, what's going on? Just a second. Sorry. I'll try again. This is the screen. I have to share. Now it's working. Oh, thank God. I'm sorry. So I'll get back just to show you the agenda. I'm so sorry. Sorry, this is our agenda for today. So we're talking about teaching contexts, your teaching contexts. Then we're going to define CLIO and its subtypes. We'll discuss the benefits of CLIO, and then you're going to fall in love with it if you haven't already. Then the limitations of CLIO, and then it's the moment that your heart will be broken. But we'll mend your heart with these tips for CLIO-inspired lessons, okay? And finally, at the end, we have the questions and answers. And then I'm going to show you finally the pictures with the students in the science class, and this is part of the second picture is part of an ancient mosaic. This is 5,000 years old, and these students and the guys in the mosaic, they have a lot in common, and we're going to find out soon. Okay, but first, I'd like to hear from you about your teaching context. It's almost impossible to contemplate everybody's teaching contexts here, right? But I have selected some situations that I'm going to share with you. So the first one, I teach in a private school. My groups have classes twice a week. When I'm talking about private school here, I mean regular school. If you're talking about Brazil, you're talking about ensino fundamental 1, ensino fundamental 2, ensino médio, primary, secondary in other countries. Okay, so this is one context. The second one, I work in a bilingual school. My groups have between 5 and 10 classes per week. Wow, this is nice. The third one, I teach little kids in kindergarten. My groups have 20-minute classes twice a week. The next one, I work in a public school. My groups have classes twice a week. And finally, I teach in a language school, in a language institute. I work with kids, teens, and adults. So now you see that for each teaching context, we have a number here. I'd like you to type in the chat box the number that is closest to your teaching context. Okay, I have presented 5 situations here. I know it's difficult to contemplate everyone, but I'd like you to choose the one that is closest to your reality. Okay, so I see 5, 4, 1. Oh, someone wrote 6 here. I wonder what 6 is. We have only 5 here. Good afternoon, Rosemary. 1 and 5. Yes, we can have more than one. 5. None of the options. Try to choose one that is the closest to your option, if possible. Private teaching, yeah, this would be a 6, I'd say. No problem, Kari. You said that you were the one who wrote 6. No problem at all. Okay. Nice. Well, I think that 5 is the most popular here, right? I teach in a language institute. I work with kids, teens, and adults. As far as I can see, 5 was the most popular. Well, it doesn't matter which context you are in, where you are teaching. You are likely to be familiar with working with content from other subjects in your English classes, right? So maybe a reading text or a listening. Maybe you have to work with projects in your school, and then in these projects you have to talk and interact with teachers from other subjects. So we, as English teachers, we have done that already in a way. And I always tell teachers that one of the nicest things about teaching English is that we can talk about everything in our classes. I mean, we can talk about any subject, any from, I don't know, the solar system to bacteria and arts and even math. We can talk about everything in our classes. So we kind of do CLIO, let's say, already. Okay, so this is one way. This is one thing that I'd like to share with you, that we do that already. So we shouldn't be scared. Not very scared, at least. So, but it's important to know that there is an organized, a systematic way, or better, even better, an approach that we can use to work with content from other subject areas in our classes. And this is CLIO. All right. So CLIO is the acronym for this approach in which we have, in which we work with other subject areas. And then I'd like your help. I'd like you to write what CLIO stands for. What do you think it stands for? Okay. Each letter here stands for a word. Okay, in CLIO. So can you type in the chat box what CLIO stands for? Mm-hmm. I see one answer here already. I'm not going to tell you if you're right or wrong, okay? I just want to see your answers, your ideas. Uh, just Mateo so far. Where's everyone? Come on, give it a try. Someone else is typing. You can Google it if you want. No problem. No? No one else? Okay, well, let's move on. Okay, I agree with integrated learning. Okay, let's move on. So CLIO stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. Mateus was right. Okay. And this was a term, CLIO as a term was coined by David Marsh, which is one of the greatest CLIO specialists that we have. This was back in 1994, but CLIO has a much longer history. What happened in 1994 is that we have David Marsh and his colleagues at, I'm not going to remember the university name now, they kind of put the ideas together to have a framework for CLIO, but this is old. Yeah, and then you're going to find out why. Remember the guys in the mosaic that I showed you with riding the horses on the carts? Well, they did CLIO at that time. They were the Akkadians, yeah? The first known CLIO activities date back to the age of the Akkadians who conquered the Sumerians. Do you remember your history classes? The Sumerians in Babylonia? Yes, these are the guys we're talking about. So when they conquered when the Akkadians conquered the Sumerians, they used Sumerian as the medium of instruction to teach the Akkadians several subjects, including theology, botany, and zoology. Okay, so here in this picture, you can see this is the first bilingual tablet known. Okay, so we have the tablet on the top, and then below it, we have a kind of a, let's say, a transcription of the tablet, and the half on the top is, I don't know, my Sumerian is not so good. But the half on the top is in Sumerian, and the content in the half below is in Akkadian. So they had this bilingual tablet. This is, I don't know, so old. This is almost 5,000 years old. Yeah. If you get closer to our present times, we can think of Latin, right? Latin was a language of instruction in Europe for centuries, yeah, and even in the colonies, in schools, in the first universities. It was the language of science, the language of law. So law, medicine, theology, science, in general, philosophy was taught with Latin as a medium of instruction. If you get even closer to our present time, think of French. French was the language of instruction for aristocrats all over the world in the 19th century, including countries as distant as Brazil and Russia. So CLIO has been done. People have been doing CLIO for a long, long time. Okay. So still talking about CLIO, giving definition, but okay, I know it's like content and language integrated learning, but in terms of approach, it is an umbrella term for many things that, as I told you before, we already do in class. So it's a way to teach and learn content from other subjects in an additional language. So in the context that we are working with here right now, it's English. But if you think about, I don't know, if we have a tribe in the Amazon, Portuguese will be the additional language of instruction, for example, of regular subjects in a school, in an indigenous school in the Amazon, for example. So Portuguese could be this additional language. I see that we already have some CLIO lovers here. Good. I looked at the chat. So it's an approach. It has, and then every CLIO lesson has two contexts. It has a double focus, a dual focus, as it is written here. We have the learning of content and the learning of language. Okay, both things are done at the same time, and then the weight of content and language. Think of that content and language as two plates on a scale. So how much you're going to emphasize content and how much you're gonna emphasize language depends on on your choices. We'll be talking about these choices and subtypes of CLIO soon. And finally, again, just to summarize that, the additional language, we were going to call it L2 here, is the medium of instruction of the subject. So the if you think of the indigenous people in the Amazon, they might learn math with Portuguese as L2. Okay. And your students in your school might learn science, for example, in a regular school might learn science with English as L2. Okay. Moving on. When you think of CLIO programs, the approach is usually applied in a limited number of subjects. Otherwise, we're talking about a different kind of school, okay? But if we think of regular schools, we have some subjects that are chosen for the CLIO classes. Typical subjects: science, arts, PE, yeah, physical education. These are popular subjects chosen for CLIO programs. It's a way to respond to the demands and expectations of a globalized world. As Fernando here mentioned, it's more meaningful. We'll get there and to this meaningfulness of CLIO. And then we're kind of, when we work with CLIO in a regular school, for example, we are kind of preparing students for these demands. We don't know. This student might choose to study abroad in higher education, for example, or will work in the future in an academic area that demands knowledge of language. So CLIO is a consequence of the spread of CLIO in a way is a consequence of globalization. That's what I wanted to say. And then when we think of parents, yeah, when we work with kids and teenagers, and even with adults, right? But when we work with kids and teenagers especially, CLIO has a high social value for them, and this is worldwide. Yeah, think of the boom we had in bilingual education in regular schools in Brazil. This has to do with parents' demands in a way, right? So parents, and I'm a parent, I have two kids. Parents feel proud when they say, oh my God, my daughter is learning about the cycle of water in English. All right, they feel good. They see that there's progress. There's something going on there besides learning language. And it's popular worldwide. Yeah, our friend CLIO is not only popular in Brazil. The whole CLIO movement is started in Spain, but now we can say that it's spread. It has spread worldwide. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have subtypes of CLIO, and it is important to have these subtypes in mind to understand the choices that you're going to make as an instructor, and also maybe the choices that the person in charge of the curriculum of your school has made. Okay. Sometimes we don't have this autonomy. If you're in a regular school, you don't have autonomy. So CLIO lessons are not all the same. There are two main subtypes of CLIO approaches. We have hard CLIO and soft CLIO. Okay. So in hard CLIO, we're talking about programs that are taught by subject teachers. There is an emphasis on content, and all the hours allocated to the subject are taught this way, using L2, using the language of as a medium of instruction. Now, when you're talking about soft CLIOs, we have shorter programs. They are taught by language teachers, us, right? And there's an emphasis on linguistic benefits. So let me give you an example so you can see the difference. Let's imagine that we have the solar system as a topic. Okay, so in a hard CLIO class, we're going to have a science teacher teaching students about the solar system with all the shape of the content. We're going to talk about the shape of the subject area later in the session. So we're going to have all this content about the solar system being taught by a science teacher. And then if there are 3 science classes per week, all these classes are taught by this science teacher in English. So they're going to learn about the solar system, right? Now, if we have a soft CLIO approach, in a soft CLIO approach, we still have these 3 classes, these 3 science classes a week, but one of them will be taught in English. So that's why it's called a shorter program. And then, okay, this teacher will talk about the solar system, will teach the word, but will teach the words for the planets, might have, I don't know, a pronunciation practice with the names of the planets, and might even use the position of the sun, the planets related to the sun as a way to teach ordinal numbers, for example. So can you see the difference? In soft CLIO, we focus on the linguistic benefits. In hard CLIO, we don't. Okay, the language is a bonus. In soft CLIO, it isn't. There is so if you think of the two plates on the scale, in soft CLIO, the plate of language is heavier, let's say. Okay. And then when we think of our reality here in Brazil, I would say, that the vast majority of schools work with soft CLIO. Okay, and it's it is more approachable, let's say, soft CLIO, because can you imagine how difficult it is to find a science teacher who's fluent in English, or a math teacher who's able to teach his or her subject in English? So soft CLIO is the choice, let's say, in most schools. Okay, and it's the easier version of CLIO to put into practice. So what are the benefits? And then I put here soft CLIO in parentheses. What are the benefits for teachers and students? Language is taught and learned in natural and authentic context. So when we work with CLIO, students have a genuine reason to learn the language, to ask you questions, and to participate in class. Okay, thinking again of the example about the solar system, they can talk about, they can ask you, for example, how bigger is the Earth? How big is the Earth compared to Mars? What the biggest planet is? You see, only comparatives. Yeah, or the biggest planet is. So they have a reason to ask you questions. We have a focus on meaning rather than form. So even when we work with language in a soft CLIO context, let's say you're going to talk about the comparatives that I give an example. So there is a reason to use the comparatives. I'm going to compare the planets in the solar system, right? So instead of starting with the rules, okay, we add ER to the adjectives. When it's a long adjective, we add more EST for the superlative, etc. We are going to start from a concrete task, which is let's compare the planets in the solar system. And then we're going to see, okay, now let's see which language we need, which structures we need. And then we come up with the comparatives, for example. When we have the CLIO approach, we have finally the cross-curricular teaching and learning into practice, put into practice. Yeah, for those who work in regular schools, this, I'm going to say a long word in Portuguese. It's almost it's so long, it's difficult to say. Interdisciplinaridade is something that schools demands, our coordinators demand when we work in regular schools, for example. And then you say, oh my God, how am I going to do that? And then CLIO is the easiest way to put interdisciplinaridade, which is cross-curricular teaching in English, into practice. And then, as a consequence of the fact that we're working with language in natural and authentic context, there's higher learner motivation. Students feel more motivation because there's more to learn than the language. Okay, of course, that maybe not all the students like a certain subject, but if you go to kindergarten, for example, and you start talking about the dinosaurs, the different types of dinosaurs, for example, their features, I'm sure that lots of boys and girls will go crazy. So you increase the motivation when we bring cross-curricular content into your classes. Another benefit, you're helping students to build academic lexes and structures in the foreign language, and this might be very, very, very important for the future of this student. Yeah, we know that nowadays, of course, that this is more restricted to higher economic social classes, but people have gone abroad to study. So if we start working with CLIO, we start to build these academic lexes and language in general that students will need to succeed in an academic context in a foreign language. Another point is that CLIO takes the students' cognitive level into account. So you're going to present content that they're able to cope with, and then you have to look at your curriculum. Yeah, we'll be talking about the curriculum in a few moments. BNCC is the document to look at. here in Brazil. I saw that we have people from Mexico and from Paraguay. You can look at your the official document from your ministries of education, but you take the cognitive level of students into account. So, for example, if you're working with math and you have kids, you're not going to present all the math operations at the same time. You're going to look at your curriculum and say, okay, so they are in third grade, they have already learned multiplication, but they haven't learned how to divide numbers yet, so not gonna work on that. So you present a challenge at students cognitive level, okay, based on your curriculum, of course. And this is good, but it can be challenging too. There is higher cognitive load in class. So because students are dealing with a new language. So imagine a student in a CLIO class. This student will be paying attention to the teacher who's speaking a foreign language. So you can see, the brain cells working there, right? But then there's also content going on, like the example I gave you about the solar system. Oh, we have all these planets to think about. So there is more brain work, let's say, in class, and this can be challenging too. And then when you plan your lessons, it's important to think of moments in which you're going to lower the cognitive load as well. Okay? So this is our teacher who fell in love with CLIO. Now, is it, this love relationship? Is it a marriage in heaven? Is it forever? Is it for everyone, every school, every teaching context? When, even mainly when you talk about hard CLIO, not really. Okay, because CLIO has limitations, and this is a moment I'm going to break your heart in a way, right? And I love this cartoon. It was created by a Spanish teacher. As I mentioned earlier, CLIO started basically as a program in schools in Spain, so they have huge experience. So they have seen the advantages and also the drawbacks of CLIO. And here we have in this cartoon one of the main problems that teachers raise when working in CLIO programs, mainly in the hard CLIO subtype, because the language level students need to cope with the tasks that you're proposing in a school subject like math or science, for example, is much higher than the language level students have. So when we have countries that have decided to adopt CLIO as an education policy, that the Ministry of Education decided, look, we're going to have students in 8th grade will have science classes in English, for example, what they do is to run language programs previously. Bulgaria has an example like that. Okay, Bulgaria has done that. They have decided to implement CLIO programs, but they realized the students were not prepared. So they had this, I don't know if it was a summer school. I don't know exactly how it worked, but they have, so students who are going to this a specific grade and are going to have these classes in English, they have this language program before. Okay, so this is one limitation. Well, so this is the one that we had in the cartoon. Students low L2 ability. Another limitation is, and this is a problem here in Brazil, a limitation for us, it's a lower exposure to the additional language outside the classroom. So if you're talking about, for example, migrant communities in European countries, let's imagine a Thai person living in London, not London, because in London we have people speaking languages from all over the world. You are on the streets of London, you're going to listen to so many languages, maybe not the English. But let's imagine a rural area. This person is going to study in a regular school, this Thai teenager, for example, who has moved to England. And then when this teenager leaves classes, he or she will go to the grocery store and speak English there, go to a snack bar, talk to English with their friends. And it's not the case, for example, here in Brazil. One thing that I have been discussing with some colleagues is that although we have more access to English in a way, nowadays because of globalization and the internet and everything, students exposure, this is my experience, okay, students exposure to English outside the classroom has kind of lowered, because in the past we had, they're going to play, think of teenagers, they're going to play video games in English. Right now the video games are all dubbed. You have all the voices of the players in Portuguese. The same thing when you go to the movies, right? You had to like watch a movie, you read the subtitles, but you were listening to English all the time. Nowadays, I was trying to watch the new 007 movie and I couldn't find a session in English. All of them were dubbed. So this is another limitation. We have little exposure to English outside the classroom in Brazil. Yeah, I don't know other countries, but in Brazil, I think this is a point. Another important point to consider is the literacy level of students in their mother tongue, in their L1, right? According to research, uh, students with good literacy skills and cognitive skills in their L1 are better prepared to learn in L2. Okay, and then the level or the quality of this education in L1, if it is a problem, for a variety of reasons, it can be a problem in a CLIO class. Okay, another limitation. We as teachers, we need to have CLIO focused pedagogical skills. So we need to learn how to teach CLIO, and we had to dedicate time to that, to reading, taking courses, etc. There might be a lack of resources because, for example, if you're going to teach about the solar system, you have to find good resources for students to learn. Maybe you have to prepare a worksheet for students to take home, and then lack of time for planning. CLIO classes, CLIO lessons, CLIO classes they're not difficult to plan, but they might take a long time. Okay, and here we have another cartoon by our dear Spanish teacher. So now I have presented here 6 different limitations, and I'd like you to write in the chat box the limitation or limitations that are the most salient in your context, in your teaching context. Yeah, just write the number in the chat box, please. I see a 5 here. 6, 2 and 3. 1, 5 and 6. Wow. 3, 1, 2, 5. Interesting. Nice. Okay. Yeah. So I see that actually, I think the only one that was not mentioned was 4, but all the others were mentioned. So there are limitations. We have to take them in mind, to bear them in mind, right? In our teaching context. But then, is this the end of teacher's love story with CLIO? Are we all brokenhearted? We have no hope? Not really. Because if you use a course book for your classes, we can have several course books nowadays. They have CLIO inspired sections or CLIO inspired lessons. And then you can also create your own lesson, right? Although one of the limitations is time that you mentioned there. So this is not the end. We're going to mend this broken heart. Okay, so I'm going to show you just briefly an example from Game Changer. I'm one of the authors of Game Changer levels 1 and 3. Denise Santos is my co-author. And here we have this spread, which is called Across the Curriculum, which has this cross-curricular approach, right? So here in this lesson from Game Changer 1, the topic is science, which we are discussing here the tips for a healthy diet. So students work with an infographic, and they have a series of comprehension questions. And then we'll be talking about this when we get to the tips. But how did we come up with this topic? How am I sure that students would be able to cope with this topic? Then I went to BNCC to write this lesson. I went to BNCC. So in 5th grade, which is before this level, let's say, if Game Changer is used in private schools, let's say that they would use Game Changer in sexto or sétimo ano, 6th or 7th grade. So in the BNCC, in our national curriculum from 5th grade, you have this skill. Então, they talk about a balanced menu, a balanced diet with the different food groups, for example, different needs, etc. So I knew that students were somehow familiar with the content. So it was not new. Okay, so this is one example. This is a spread in a textbook. Okay. Here we have another example working with street art. And here we have the indication of the topic of the subject area. Okay. Now, we saw the limitations. We saw that CLIO is great, but there might be some problems, right? So what are some tips? Let's take a look at some helpful tips that can help you create and carry out a successful CLIO-inspired lesson. Well, tip number one, and I'm talking here about BNCC, which is the national curriculum in Brazil. People from other countries, please look at the document from your country. The Ministry of Education or a similar department has probably issued something like that. So it's important for us when we're going to think of, I want to start working with CLIO in my classes, and you're working with kids and teenagers. Check these parts. We have unidades temáticas, objeto de conhecimento, we have habilidades from other subjects, not English, on BNCC. And here we have two skills. These are skills from BNCC that help me choose to write tips for a healthy diet in Game Changer. Okay. The second tip, it's important to choose topics according to students' cognitive level and interests. So, as I mentioned before, if you're working with math, with kids who are 7 or 8 years old, for example, I cannot work with the 4 math operations because they haven't learned them yet. So I'm not respecting their and they haven't learned because they're not prepared cognitively for them, okay? So I'm not respecting their cognitive level, okay? It's also important to find out students' interests, like the children who love dinosaurs that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so investigating their interests and checking the official document from your country that rules the curriculum will help you make your choices for your classes. Okay. Another tip: plan your lesson carefully. Again, plan your lesson carefully. Okay, a CLIO lesson demands at least when you're beginning working with CLIO, you're going to need more time to prepare a CLIO lesson than it would take you to prepare a regular English class. Okay, and then if you have problems, if you're in trouble, talk to the expert. Okay, talk to the science teacher, talk to the math teacher, go to text. Nowadays, we have several videos. You say, oh gosh, I have this history class, I have to talk about the French Revolution. You can find incredible teachers on YouTube teaching about the French Revolution, for example. Okay, so this expert can be a colleague if you're in a regular school. It can be a YouTuber, who knows everything about history, for example. Okay. And then thinking of the lesson preparation, we have the focus on the content, right? You have to look at this content and think, okay, how I'm going to work with that. But you also should also think of, in your planning, think of how you're going to help and guide your students as they receive and produce new content. Yeah, basically how you're going to scaffold this new content, and what is the language that students need to accomplish the goal that you're establishing. Yeah, so the thing is, the more prepared you are for the lesson, the lower the chances of leaving your students behind. But remember, even when we're working with soft CLIO, English, in our case, right? English is a means of instruction, is a medium of instruction, is not the objective of the lesson per se. Okay? Okay. And then remember, I think this is not only for CLIO, it's for every lesson. Things can go wrong. And even when we try to anticipate all difficulties, and that's okay. All right, that's okay. Things can go wrong. Maybe it's a problem with equipment. Maybe students didn't like the subject at all. It was a hot day. You you had problems before entering the classroom. We know that our lessons don't need to be perfect. Sometimes we plan carefully and things, just go wild. Just remember that it's okay, right? Now, another tip. Um, when I was working with that class, the tips for a healthy diet, for example, yeah, the lesson that I showed you, it's interesting that students will be naturally exposed to food vocabulary, right? It was an infographic with tips. I had a lot of imperative occurrences there. So I worked a lot with the imperative, but my focus was not teaching the imperative or teaching the food vocabulary. The structure and the lexis were bonuses that I had. So we have to prioritize content when we work with CLIO, and keep in mind that language is the vehicle. Now, the next one. This is very nice. It's important to incorporate strategies and tools from the target subject into your lesson. Yeah. Every subject area has a so-called shape. Okay. And it is a nice idea to incorporate this shape or this set of text genres into our practice. So, for example, if you're talking about science, you can have lots of infographics. You can have an infographic, for example, sorry, this is a diagram. Well, which is an infographic anyway, because we have text and images combined. Oops, sorry. You can have an infographic. We can work with timelines in history classes. We can work with maps. Although we already have incorporated these into English language teaching, but try to bring these tools or this shape, the text genres from the other subjects into your practice when you're working with these subjects. Okay. Next, here we have an example of. I wanted to show you some things that we had in that a healthy tips lesson. Yeah. So I had here an infographic with the ideal plate for a healthy diet. We have, oh, sorry, these are not from the lessons. These are from another content. I'm going to tell you in a minute. Here we have a table with nutritional facts, another table. We have a list with tips. Okay, this was all this content, these images you're seeing here. They were all taken from a document by the NHS, which is the Healthy Ministry, Healthy Department in the UK. And it's there, it's free. You can use, it's free of copyright, and you can use all this content in your lesson. So you can create a great lesson from this content. Okay. The next one. Always start your lesson by activating what students know about the topic. Believe me, students know a lot more than we think about the topic. So don't just enter the class and say, okay, let's talk about healthy tips. Open the book. Come on, tell me. Let's do the activities. Try to explore the background knowledge they have, what they know about a healthy diet, what they know about food groups. Yeah, if you take that example. So they usually know much more than we think. And if students use Portuguese, in our case, or students use L1, help them by rephrasing their ideas in English. All right. They'll probably come up with this previous knowledge in L1. So help them express their ideas by rephrasing them in English. And then I have here a suggestion, for example, a board that you can have. You can create like separate a board, your board, leave a corner of your board and just create a language bank there with vocabulary, language chunks that students will need to accomplish the goal, right? Another advantage of activating students' previous knowledge, of activating schemata, is that you show your students that you value their knowledge. You show students that what they know, what they already know, that is not English, that is not the language, is also important to you. And I think this is a very nice thing to keep in mind. Next tip, which is related to the previous one. You activate previous knowledge, and then you encourage students to anticipate the content from the input. So in your CLIO lesson, you're going to have some kind of input. It can be a text, a video, even an image, right? So encourage them to look at this content or if you're talking about a video, a frame of the video, for example, and try to anticipate what they're going to see, what they're going to learn. Okay. So here we have an example. Look at the images in the text. What do you think it is about? If you're talking about that infographic, they can say, teacher, it's about food. Oh, no, it's about eating well. Okay, they will be able to anticipate a lot of content. Well, this is a true tip for everything we're going to do in class, actually, not only CLIO. Now, tip number 8, and this is a little bit more complex, be ready to guide students through comprehension skills demands. So they might have more challenging demands to deal with the subject from another area than they would have in a regular language class. So they might have a reading text, work with a reading text, for example, that is a little bit higher than what they're used to. A listening text that has a lot of vocabulary they are not familiar with, because you're talking about academic language. So when you are in charge, when you're going to create a CLIO lesson or create CLIO materials for your classes, make sure you include a variety of activities, a variety of tasks, always choosing from the most suitable options to help your students, to support students' comprehension. Yeah. And then this is something that I tell every teacher. If you're working with ready-made materials, classes, a textbook, for example, don't be afraid of tweaking the activities, changing the tasks according to your students' needs. You are the one who knows your students best. You are the one who knows their needs. Yeah. So if you look at an activity and say, oh, this is not going to work, or oh, this is too easy for my students, don't be afraid of changing it. Okay. As a materials writer, I have talked to teachers all over the country, all over Brazil, and even abroad. And what I can say about Brazilian teachers specifically is that we respect the textbook too much sometimes. All right. So don't be afraid of changing tasks. And this is even more important when we're talking about CLIO lessons. Okay. If you during preparation you realize an activity is not going to work, change it. Don't simply skip it, because skipping is too easy. Just, or if you skip it, think of good reasons to do that, but don't be afraid of changing the task. Okay. Tip number 9, make key language salient. Okay. So you have a goal in your lesson. Okay. I want students to be able to discuss tips for a healthy diet, for example, right? This is your goal. What language will students need for that? What is the key language they need to understand this content, right? So here I have another example from Game Changer. We have this feature called Words in Context, in which we work with vocabulary that we considered key for students to understand that infographic, right? I'm going to show you another example. This is from the final pages of Game Changer, when we have some extra reading activities. The keywords or keywords and words that students might not be familiar with are highlighted in yellow, as you can see. Okay. Tip number 10, we're getting to the end of our tips. Be ready to support students' spoken and written output, because I would say that this is the climax of your classes. Okay, what are your students going to produce? Yeah, if you think of a cycle in which we present content, practice that content, and then we have some kind of production. Students need support, okay, to express their ideas either orally or in writing. Okay, so we must support students' oral and written production in class. When we have speaking activities in CLIO lessons, students might need more formal scaffold. Yeah, they might need models, language frames. They might need some language practice before they are able to do the task. And the same thing when it comes to writing. Okay, they might need those academic language chunks to perform. Here I have an example of a board. Yeah, for a discussion, for an oral discussion. I have the language bank on the right with some vocabulary I think students will need in this discussion. And then it's a discussion about being a vegetarian or not. Okay, this is the context, sorry. Yeah, and then we have some language chunks. I think it's a good idea because, I don't think it's a good idea because, and then I can continue and present some other language chunks to support students' production. Okay, and finally, our bonus tip. Be ready to support students' thinking skills. Remember that I mentioned earlier that in CLIO classes, the cognitive load is higher. So our students in CLIO lessons, they work harder, let's say, in cognitive terms, than students who are just working with language or content in isolation, okay? And then we should not believe that the thinking skills that students need to thrive in our classes, to learn, will be naturally developed. Okay, they need guidance. Students need guidance through all the thinking processes we propose in our lessons. So here I have a table that can help you organize ideas. For example, when it comes to critical thinking, different things that they might need to do in a CLIO lesson, and they might need help. Okay, thinking skills. They will attribute meaning or content to something. They will compare and contrast. I'm not talking about language here, okay? I'm talking about thinking skills. Grouping and classifying, sequencing, prioritizing, analyzing, detecting bias, which is hard, okay? And then you work with inference as well here. Evaluating. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Oh, sorry, guys. Sorry. I think I pressed mute. Oh, I'm so sorry. Did you hear the part about the critical thinking and creative thinking? Yes? No? Yes? Okay, now. Okay. So, no. Okay, so talk about again about critical thinking and creative thinking. Sorry, guys. So it doesn't have to do with language, right? We're talking about thinking, the cognitive load here. And then we have some skills on the left that are related to critical thinking, such as comparing, detecting bias, making conclusions, and others that are related to creative thinking, which can be which are closely related to the production stage. So they have to make generalizations, they have to visualize. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. There was a problem here. I think it wasn't me this time. I think someone pressed. Someone said, "You talk too much, Viviane. Stop." Sorry, I'm about to finish. So it is fascinating. It is challenging, but seeing the level of motivation in our students is so gratifying. So I'd like to leave a final message for you. I love this quote because we as teachers we have to keep reinventing ourselves and reinventing uh, our practices all the time because our students today will be different from our students next year, which will be different from the other students. So we have to try to provide students with the most suitable approaches, the most suitable lessons all the time. I think this has to be our aim. Okay. Well, now I'm done. Almost done. I'd like to check the questions and answers now. Let me see if I can find. Hmm, okay, so now I'm going to check the questions and answers. Okay, so Doris Soares asked, doesn't the limited command of the language get in the way when it comes to grasping the concepts you want to teach? Yes, this was something we discussed as a limitation. How do you prevent that from happening? Well, you can scaffold the practice all the time. For example, providing the language bank that I mentioned earlier can help your students deal with that. You can have some vocabulary work, for example, before your classes. One thing that I like to do a lot when it comes to discussions, because some language chunks in discussions, they will happen all the time. So my students, some years ago, I had some students who had like a laminated page with language chunks for discussion. So they knew that every time they had a discussion, they had to take out that laminated page, and then they were going to use those chunks in that discussion. So we have to scaffold. All right, it is a limitation, but we have to help students either by teaching vocabulary or keeping a language bank on the board, or using, for example, there's a strategy that I used for language chunks that are recurring chunks in the classroom, for example. Okay, this is one way you can work with that. At what level can you start using CLIO so that students will take advantage of the school curriculum and the target language? It all depends. It all depends on your context, on the hours that students will be dedicating to CLIO. I mean, the hours allocated to CLIO in the school program, teachers' skills as well. So you can start from kindergarten, right? But you have to plan your lesson and plan your program, not only the lesson, obviously, but plan the program carefully, right? So there isn't an age, Fernando. I would say that it all depends on the program. And then we have here, okay, different things you can use for CLIO, diagrams, tables, pie charts. Okay. Okay, there was a problem with the audio. Again, sorry. Interesting question. What about evaluation with CLIO? Do you take into consideration the school curriculum when performing it? Yes, I think if you're running a CLIO program and you're preparing and you're assessing your students, you have to assess language and content. Okay, this is Viviane's opinion. This is my opinion. Okay, you should assess language and content, not only language. It will depend a lot, again, on the program itself. It's not a decision that in a regular school. This is not a decision that a teacher would answer alone or have the autonomy to answer, right? So it depends a lot, but I think that we have to assess language and content. Okay, and then, okay, thank you. CLIO approach would be only if taught one subject for the whole lesson. Yes, if you have a lesson, it would be more productive to focus on just one subject, Rosemary. Rosemary, I think it's more productive, because then if you think of a lesson, you start with science and then you're going to work with math. Sometimes you have, you can have science and math in one lesson if you're talking about analyzing graphs. If you have bar charts or different types of graphs, you can have science and math, but I think you should choose one of the subjects to focus on, right? Remember the cognitive load. It's already too high for students, okay, because they have to look at content and look at language. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions. I think I answered all of them, at least the ones that were in the questions and answers. Any other questions? Let's see if I can read them. Let me see. I think that's all. Oh, I think there is one more question. Okay, people thanking me. Thank you guys for having me here. This amazing audience. It's a Friday afternoon. We're all tired. It's the end of the year. So guys, well, thanks a lot. It was a real pleasure to be here with you today. I hope you find the tips and the information discussed here today useful and something that you can apply to your teaching practice. Okay? Thank you, and Bye bye. See you next time.